that have material implications and impacts, I find are overcome by simply opening the door to this other realm and other possibility. In the book, I talk about how most constructionists talk about race indeed as a construction, right, as synthetic, as something that has changed over time and all the things. But one of my philosopher friends at the University of New England, he says, scratch a social constructionist and a biological naturalist bleeds. On a fundamental level, there is a critical overlap between a biological belief in race and a constructionist belief in race that can be very hard to dismantle or disentangle for folks. And again, that results in the naturalization of the category, which means the naturalization of the problem. But if we can invite more people to consider that the construction is actually racism itself, right? That the human-made phenomenon is actually racism itself. And that racism, as defined in my book, includes and in fact requires the belief in race and the practice of assigning races to human beings, right? That opens the door to much more effective conversations, because now I'm starting to disentangle race from myself, which means I'm starting to become more clear-eyed, more astute about the problem of racism and how I participate in that, right? And just, you look at the history, like Dr. Ashford and I were talking about earlier, you look at the history of anti-racism in this country, going back to the days of abolition, and you see consistently a reconstructionist effort there as it pertains to race and racism. Frederick Douglass is saying, I'm black and I'm human, right? That should seem like something that doesn't need to be asserted, right? Like, why does he have to say that? He has to say it because being racialized as black during his day meant that he was seen as not human. Right? So let's try to reconstruct race to write the humanity, assert the humanity into the category of blackness. All the way through the Harlem Renaissance, again, I'm black and I'm human. All the way to the Civil Rights Movement, I'm black and I'm human. All the way to the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm black and I'm human. My life matters, right? Those are reconstructionist efforts around race that indicate to me whether you believe that race is hereditary or you believe it's a construction and it's synthetic. It keeps us in the problem because this is where we've been now for centuries, right? And definitely constructionism for at least, let's say, the solid 60, 70 years or so, when that started to be more like mainstream. We're still entrenched in the problem, and in some ways I think we've regressed. Or maybe it just seems that way because it's more in our faces because of social media and all the things, preaching to the choir. But yeah, that's why I think there's benefit in exploring the imaginariness of race, even if one doesn't hold that view about race. Hi, Dr. Wambui.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation. And yes, I too am looking forward to diving in. I was particularly interested by the fact that you use this feminist concept that you say you've spoken about coming to, but the imaginary, the possibility of imagination. And then of course, identifying as an Afrofuturist. So calling on to an Africana, what has become an Africana project. I'm interested and I like the fact, the idea of hope in the demand, in your demand to us to explode concept of race and then the confrontation with racism. I'd like you to talk about what we do between now and the then.
Yes.
How do we deal with the fact of race now, right? You mentioned this during the interview, incarcerated populations, excluded populations in all kinds of ways, class, nationalist ideologies that exclude. What do we do with that? How do we work racism? How do we work to racelessness in the face of the fact of these real entrenched issues?
Thank you for that softball question. Another softball. This is easy. And by that, I mean it's impossible. So my contention right now is that K-12 is where it's at. That's why K-12 consistently in American life is the battleground for political ideologies and dominance, right? Because many of us, as we age, we recognize our hope, right? The future is with the children. And whatever we're teaching the children, that's going to be the future, right? For better, worse, or indifferent. This is something I'm working on now as an Atlantic Fellow for Racial Equity, is K-12 curriculum, because I recognize the significance of this. If we get the K-12 curriculum correct, and we stop teaching, for example, in science class that race is biological, if we teach students all of the philosophies of race and use the philosophies of race to study the history of humanity across time and across place as just one lens, right, to study human history, because of course we know there's more to human history than the problem of racism, yada, 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 right? If we offer that as one lens, just teaching them the philosophy of race. Children, this may or may not be surprising, right? But many of us in this room have probably seen the viral videos of the two young children running into each other's arms. One has a paler complexion, one has a deeper complexion than mine. And we're all like, oh man, so innocent, so naive, right? So classy, so demure. It's because we haven't taught them to be racist yet, right? So if we don't teach them to be racist, then the likelihood of them growing up to be racist, growing up to be obstacles to a freer and better future for all, significantly decreases. But because we continue to obscure all of the pathways in terms of how we can think about race, and we continue to co-opt only 4 of the 6 philosophies of race, socialize children to grow into those of us in this room who are like, what are you talking about? Race is imaginary, right? Or what are you talking about? Race is something that can be or should be abolished, right? If we get it right with children, then that's critical. That's a critical component of that. Otherwise, we will continue to have to do the very, very hard Smeagol-like work of battling ourselves. Most people, if we're being honest, don't want to battle themselves about this thing, right? Like, many people do not care about this topic, race and racism, or the reality of it, or the unreality of it. Like, that's just a matter of fact, right? A lot of people are consumed instead with feeding their families and keeping a roof over their heads and so on and so forth, right? So that being the case, K-12 to me is where it's at. And with light speed, I think we need to get to a place of delivering the right curriculum there. Outside of that, because of course we all still exist, and we didn't get the curriculum that I'm talking about and imagining happening for future generations, engaging with this work, thinking about how aspects of the Wayfinder can be incorporated, just like we incorporate feminism or other types of I would like to see the Togetherness Wayfinder being incorporated and offered in different classes, from philosophy to Africana studies to English literature to anthropology, to sociology, to social work, to psychology. I mean, you name it, right? Where racism touches everything, the Togetherness Wayfinder can and hopefully will at some point in life touch everything. And this is an invitation then to my fellow colleagues, right, who are coming from different disciplinary backgrounds and specializations, to not just read the book, right, but to recognize that I'm one person. I talk a good game. I do, and I say it with my chest, right? Like I'm confident about this, right? But I do not know everything, and I have not thought of everything. I cannot literally solve the world's most pressing problem single-handedly. So this is truly an invitation to all of you. And many of the students in the room, I know, are going to go on to be future teachers or future professors. This is an invitation to you as well, right? Think about the kind of curriculum that you're going to deliver, and think about the material impacts that come on the other side of that. And then everything else, I need everyone else to just participate and help build and develop, right? Because we don't solve these kinds of problems with just one person, right?
We have time for probably one more question.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for expanding our minds and our visions on this particular subject. I want to say, in reference to something you said a little earlier, I remember being very little in the streets of New York, outside, and I always played with the boys. Those were my dudes, all right? And one day, my mother bust my bubble because she yelled out of the 5th floor window and said, "What's wrong with you? Get your shirt back on." I said, "Mommy, the boys got their shirt off." She said, "You ain't no boy." And I was like, dang, I knew there was something different. You know? I thought I was one of them. I mean, I didn't think there was no different. I didn't think there was no lines. You know what I'm saying? So I see what your work is doing, and just even when you look at the poster here, you know, it's like another galaxy, okay? It's one that we can get to. It's one that we need to get to. It's something that this country, even though the founders owned enslaved people to give them their dignity, enslaved people, they wrote something that we can all aspire to for all of us to come together. And in dealing with people from, you know, myself from the streets of New York, you know, to central New York, to Austin, Texas, to St. Louis, Missouri, Louisville, Kentucky, Huntsville, Alabama, New Jersey, where I actually live. It is possible. Peace is possible on this issue. But we've got to find some tools. And what I hear you saying is, I don't know everything, but here's a tool that we can all come together and work together. You know, I suggest everybody know who you are. I don't think she's trying to stand up here and say, you know, disperse of your blackness. You know, James Brown said, "I'm black and I'm proud." And I'll stand for that to the day I die. You know, I used to wear red, black, and green patches on the back of my, sewed them on my jeans years ago with my afro, okay? So I'm always gonna have that. I think it's important to know who you are. And then I think it's also important for all of us to know who we are. Take the time to know who you are, and know that who you are doesn't have to take away from anybody else, all right? We're all human beings. We all bleed red blood. Okay, we all breathe this breath, this air, okay? But once we can move the sabotage, the toxic, the poison of racism out of the conversation, once we can move that out of the system, once we can move that out of the criminal justice system, once we can move that out of how we do business, once we can move that out of who we rent to and who we give mortgages to and who we bank with, once we can move that poison, that virus out of the society and how we operate with each other, once we can remove yes, you're a different skin complexion than what I am, but guess what? You still need to eat tonight. You still need to go to the bathroom. You still need to pay your bills. You still want to have a family. You still want to live. Once we move that, because colonization, racism, and the way people operated with Africans when they came over here, they sabotaged the human experience. And we've got to deal with that, but I don't have to deal with that by hating you. And you don't have to deal with that by hating me. So again, going back to her book is giving us a tool and giving us a way to come together without demoralizing each other or taking the past and shoving it into somebody else's face, whether that be on whatever side you're on. And I'll leave it there.
No better note to end on. Thank you, Redland. Thank you all so much for coming, and the fact you are the real MVPs. The fact that everyone stayed too. I'm going to be selling my book and also signing it. I accept Cash, Venmo, Zelle, Cash App, like whatever you have, and $15. And then maybe one day my signature will be worth something, and you can sell it for more. Thank you all very much.